Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Farming Connect webinar on the control of agricultural pollution, what is changing. My name's Lee Price, and I'm the Development Manager for Farming Connect, and tonight I'll be your chair for this evening. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Keith Owen, Environmental Consultant with Quebec, and Chris Duller, Soil and Grassland Consultant, who will provide tonight an overview of the changes that have come in and are required in relation to the agricultural pollution regulations. The regulations were announced earlier on in January 2021, and they are being brought in a phased approach. The first phase came in April of this year. The second phase and the main phase will come in on the 1st of January 2023, and the final phase will come in August 24. Tonight's webinar will provide you a brief overview of what elements are due to come in each phase and how these will affect your business. After both speakers have covered the regulations, I will cover off some of the Farming Connect services and support and advice that is available in relation to the regulations for you to access. Tonight's webinar will be recorded and will be available after tonight's webinar on the Farming Connect YouTube page for you to watch again if you so wish. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor to our first speaker, Keith Owen from Quebec. Over to you, Keith.
Cheers, Lee. Okay, thanks, Lee. As Lee said, we'll just give you a quick overview of what the regulations are and what dates are important. I'll just share the screen with you and I'll go through the PowerPoint. It won't take long. I'll whiz through it so we can have a look at it, and then you can see what's coming in on what date, and you can start to plan around what you think you require or what you don't. So, as Lee said, the control of pollution regulations, they came in on the 1st of April 21. And I'll deal with the construction side and the sort of buildings, slurry storage side, whereas Chris will look at the application, what you can spread, when you can spread, and how that affects everything. So from the 1st of April 21, the regs came in, and they had to set construction and capacity standards for organic manures, silage storage, and it'll be phased in over a 3-year period. So it will eventually apply to all new or substantially reconstructed storage facilities. So that's slurry stores and silage clamps. One of the main differences that's come in immediately are now NRW need a pre-construction notice 14 days before the commencement of works on site. So previously, you had to inform NRW 14 days before you used the facility, whereas now it's 14 days before you start to work on site. The structures still have to be made up to a specific construction standard, which is known as BS 5502. That's exactly the same as it was previously, so the same standards apply. The pre-construction notice now includes something called a WQE3 form, which is a follow-on from the old WQE4 form, sorry, which is a follow-on of the old WQE3. So that basically is signed off by somebody suitably qualified for building the facility. It'll show that the thing's been built to standard and it's up to specification. The other things that you will require are the planning permissions and potentially SUDS approval, but that's related to the roofing of stores. So if you're roofing a silage clamp, roofing a slurry store, the SUDS will apply to that. So I'll go through it in order of the dates that these things come in. So from the 1st of April 21, the only structure that's included in the new regulations, if you're building a new silage clamp. So the silage clamps are included. And basically, there is no difference on silage clamp construction from the previous SAFO regs. So that's come in immediately, and it'll now be part of a cross-compliance inspection. So if you've got a silage clamp that's already in place and was built after 1991, or if you're thinking of building a new one, it'll have to comply with the new regulations now. So a silage clamp includes all sorts of clamps, whether it's a maize clamp or a silage clamp, it's still classed as a clamp. Same things as previously apply, must have an impermeable floor. It's got to be 10 meters from a water course, 50 meters from a borehole or drinking water source, or 10 meters from a ditch. If you're building a new clamp, it needs to have a perimeter channel around the outside of the boundary walls, and the floor must extend under the boundary walls. You can direct the effluent to an effluent tank, which is calculated with that equation there, or you can direct it to the slurry store. Now, this will become clearer later on in the talk, but if you're directing it to a slurry store, that slurry store must have the capacity to take the volume of surface rainfall off that clamp. So if the clamp is open and isn't roofed, that can add up to a lot of water. So diluted clamp ground if stored in isolation, so if it's not contaminated by slurry, can be classed as lightly fouled, and that can be spread to the land throughout the proposed closed period if it qualifies as lightly fouled runoff. So lightly fouled runoff, this is probably the most effective and easiest way to reduce the volumes going into your slurry store and increase your available capacity without having to spend on a new storage facility. So as the clarification says there, runoff can be spread during the closed period, and it can significantly reduce the volumes entering your slurry store. So that in red is the clarification of the lightly fouled runoff. So lightly fouled livestock, urine, feces contaminating otherwise clean rainfall derived runoff, but with a low nutrient content. So e.g. from yards trafficked by livestock, where basically animals just travel to and from and don't have free access and are regularly kept clean. Parlour washings, if they're not contaminated by slurry, significantly contaminated by slurry, and open silage clamp runoff. So this basically means by the time the closed period comes in, which will be the middle of October, you shouldn't be producing a lot of silage effluent runoff anyway, and the dilution factor will be high enough to class it as lightly fouled. But underneath, the following that are rich in N are regarded as slurry, not lightly fouled runoff. So if you've got liquids passing through a weeping wall store, that will be classed as slurry. You won't be able to spread that during the closed period. You'll have to contain it for 5 months. Similarly with strainer boxes, material coming out of slurry separators, feed yards where stock have free access, and any FYM stored on open areas. Neat silage effluent as well cannot be spread. It's got to be diluted. So separating your clamp runoff, that helps reduce the volumes going in. That's just a quick equation there of an average size clamp with the sort of rainfall we get. So over the winter period, you're looking at about 264,000 gallons of that size clamp, which you would then need to store in your slurry store. So obviously diverting that away will help increase available capacity in your store. So the specific calculation for the effluent tank would only be 34 cubic meters. Yes, you've got to empty it, but it's a lot cheaper to empty that tank with lightly fouled runoff through the winter period and construct additional slurry storage for that volume. So that's just one way of helping your storage capacity in your slurry store without spending a fortune on new storage. So if you get a cross-compliance inspection on your silage clamps, these are the sort of things people are looking at when they come and do the inspection. Any earth bank clamp built after 1991 will be classed as non-compliant. Okay, earth bank clamps are not compliant with the previous SAFO regulations or with the current new regulations. So if you've got an earth bank clamp, it was built after 91, that will be non-compliant, and you will need to get that up to current standards. How NRW are going to view this, I'm not sure. They'll probably look at it as a pollution risk, but legally they are non-compliant unless it's the new style of earth bank clamp that's got a boundary channel around the outside and the floor extends under the earth bank. I've seen very few. I can count on one hand that I've seen of those clamps. So if you haven't got an external boundary channel, that will be non-compliant. If you haven't got sufficient effluent collection capacity, again, that will fail. Open clamp runoff, taking up capacity within the slurry source system, your slurry storage then will have to be you'll have to prove that you've got enough to take the volume off that clamp for the winter period. The other issue could potentially be wall strength, depending on how old the clamp is, or damage to the floors. So these are issues that are in now from the 1st of April 21, okay? So adapting existing clamps to achieve compliance can be difficult and expensive, especially the Earthbank clamp system. So if you've got something you've built after 1991 and you need a bit of advice on how you can put it right, you can speak to the guys with Lee and Farming Connect and we can help out with that. But you need to start thinking about that now, because that is in place. Those rules are here now. So there's just a quick example of the clamps. Every clamp you see there would be classed as non-compliant. The top left hasn't got a boundary channel. Top right hasn't got an effluent collection channel, has got an Earthbank. The other two are pretty obvious. There's no control of effluent, and then just an Earthbank clamp with an permeable floor. All those would fail. Wrapped bale storage, that can be stored on a hard standing, doesn't require any collection facilities, but it must be more than 10 meters away from a ditch or water course and 50 meters away from a borehole or drinking water source. So if you've got wrapped bales and you've got an Earthbank clamp with a concrete floor or hard standing, you could use the Earthbank clamp to store the wrapped bales legally, but it would be difficult to use it to store silage as clamp silage. So that's in place now from the 1st of April. The next date you need to think about is the 1st of Jan 23. This is when the storage of organic manures and FYM comes into play. So farmyard manure, not slurry, must be stackable. So it must be able to be stacked, okay? So poultry manure and solid manure, e.g. farmyard manure, can be stored within the livestock house if it's undercover, within a roofed building, within a vessel, or on an impermeable surface. But if the vessel is open, or if you're storing it on an open yard, everything that runs off that will be classed as slurry, and you will have to control that and store it within the slurry storage system. And that will have to have enough capacity for the 5 months under the new regs. So if you're storing stackable muck externally on a concrete yard, you need to be collecting the runoff and show that the facility that collects the runoff complies with the regulations. Temporary field heaps are still permissible. So you can still take stackable muck into temporary field heaps. The location needs to be carefully looked at. You know, you don't need any free drainage. You don't need any runoff going onto tracks or anything sloping down to watercourse. So you can still do it, but you need to look at where you're storing it. If you're storing poultry manure, it's got to be stored under cover and under an impermeable cover, whether it's tarpaulin. But the important thing to remember here now, FYM or cattle manure that is stored in field heaps, that can be spread throughout the closed period. And even if you're storing it in sheds or buildings, if it's stored internally with no slurry runoff, that can be spread throughout the closed period. However, if it's organic manures with over 30% N, i.e. poultry manure, that cannot be spread. That also includes digested. So if you've got poultry manure you're storing in temporary field heaps, that has to be stored and covered for the whole period. Temporary field heaps must not be located within 10 meters of surface water or land drains. It's basic common sense, but it shouldn't be stored within 50 meters of springs, wells, or boreholes, land likely to be waterlogged or floodplain. And it should not stay in the same position for more than 12 months and should not return to the same spot within 2 years. So you have to move it annually. You also will have to mark this location of these field heaps on your field risk map. Chris will talk a bit more about that in his talk, but you'll have to identify these things on the map, where you're storing it, where you're moving it to. And you know, if it's on a risky location, then you need to think about relocating somewhere else. Long term, I would strongly recommend you start to think about storing it undercover. Once it's undercover, you don't need any collection facility off it. You need to ensure there's no clean water running into the facility, and you need to seal the wall floor joint. But once it's undercover, it's stackable muck. You can spread it all year round and it doesn't pose any slurry issues. Okay, the final date you need to think about is the 1st of August 24. Now that is when the slurry storage capacity kicks in. So by the 1st of August 24, you'll need to have slurry storage that will provide 5 months winter storage for any cattle slurry, 6 months for pigs and poultry. And that will need to be in place by the 1st of August 2024. So you need to start thinking about how you can reduce volumes now, and then look at how you can get to this storage point by that date. Now, I know there's been a lot of publicity about the new regulations on 5 month storage, etc. This is not a great deal of difference from the previous regulations, but that required 4 month storage, and they've been in place since 1991. So they've been in place for 30 years. So legally, it's not as big a jump as everybody seems to think it is. But by the 1st of August 24, that will need to be in place. So your slurry store, you will have to prove that 5 months winter's capacity is provided, but that has to include any surface rainfall onto the store, plus the free bud requirement for the stores, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it'll be 5 months for the cattle, 6 months pigs and poultry. That will then be tied into the closed period. So your storage period will be from 1st of October to 1st of March. It'll extend to 1st of April for pigs and poultry. The storage facility must obviously be impermeable, i.e. it doesn't leak. And the calculations must include everything. It's not just the cattle slurry or the pigs and poultry, it's the yard areas that are classed as producing slurry. If you've got muck on the yard, that needs to be included. If you've got clamp runoff going in, that needs to be included. It'll be based on a 5 month rainfall figure, and that website there will direct you to your 5 month winter's rainfall figure. Okay. So moving on. So the non-spreading period. So whilst you'll have 5 months storage capacity, you will not be able to spread from the 15th of October to the 15th of Jan on grassland, or the 1st of September to 31st of December for sandy and shallow soils. Now, that is a 3 month non-spreading period in a 5 month storage capacity. So there's a lot of noise about what's going to happen at the end of the non-spreading period. Everybody will be out. Well, everybody won't be out theoretically because they've got 2 months of buffer within the slurry store. So it's all about management of emptying the store before the period starts. I think that's the important thing to try and remember. There's restricted spreading then after the closed period up until the end of Feb, which is limited to 30 cubic meters per hectare or 8 tons per hectare of poultry manure. And there must be 3 weeks between each spreading. And as I said before, all organic manures with over 30% N cannot be spread during the closed period. So that ties into this, basically the same as the slurry. So the capacity for slurry storage, 5 months winter storage, 6 months pigs and poultry, is based on the stock housed over the winter period from August 24. As with the clamps, you can't build a new slurry store 10 meters from a watercourse, 50 meters from a borehole or drinking water source. The calculations must include the free bud, and this is where a lot of the calculations go wrong. So the first 300 millimeters on a concrete store or circular tank, you cannot fill. So you take that out of the equation, and on an earth bank store, it's 750 millimeters. So the free bud needs to be taken from the lowest boundary point. So if you're looking at any of your existing stores, you need to calculate how much capacity you've got based on the lowest boundary point, deduct the free bud, deduct the surface rainfall that falls on the thing, then work out how much you've got. So your capacity then needs to include surface rainfall, as I said, and if you're building a new store, you have to provide a safety fence around the perimeter for it to comply. This is the sheet, it's quite difficult to see, but this is the sheet of the farmer's guidance notes provided by NRW. This will tell you how much slurry each type of animal and age of animal will produce. So this will give you your actual storage volumes over the winter period for each type of stock. So you basically, it's a mathematical calculation. You add up your stock numbers, you know what's housed, you know what they're housed on, If they're housed on cubicles, they'll be producing slurry. You need to work the calculation out. You add in your yard areas, take away your freeboard, take away your rainfall, and you'll see how short you are if you are short of storage capacity. So additional storage capacity, if you require, can include your existing stores, okay? So if you've got an existing store, as long as it's structurally sound and doesn't pose a pollution risk, that can be included in your total capacity. Most of the slurry store designs I do are based on using the existing store normally as a form of reception pit, and then looking at new storage if it's required, whether it be a satellite store or located next to the one you've already got. But that tends to be the most economical way to do it after you've looked at reducing all the other things you could pull out of the equation before you start doing the calculations. But once you've completed your new store, if it's in tandem with your existing store, that needs to provide the 5 or 6 months storage. The idea behind this is that it'll give you effectively total control of what you've got and how you store it for the closed period, and then you've got a bit of wiggle room over the next 2 months to be able to spread if the weather turns or if you need time. So that'll help maximize the nutrient benefit and reduce the issues we get now with people spreading when they have to spread rather than when they need to spread, where we get the runoff problem, and that's why we're in the situation we're in today. Parlour washings can be stored in isolation, as I said earlier, and as lightly fouled, and there's a specific calculation for that tank, and those can be spread throughout the closed period as long as land and weather conditions are suitable. So taking the parlour washings out can reduce what goes into your slurry store if you're a dairy farm by up to a third. So you're buying yourself a third's capacity for very little investment. The impact of rainwater needs to be considered, okay? Most of the places I go to produce as much contaminated rainfall as they do slurry. So it's by far the cheapest long-term option to try and pull that out of the equation. So all surface rainfall on feed yards, loafing yards, scrape yards will be classed as slurry and will need to be stored. Now, when you're in a high rainfall figure like most of Wales is, that adds up quickly and makes a hell of a difference to the size of store you need. So by taking that out of the equation, I think the FBG window's open at the moment, looking at roofing yards. That's why that grant is there. It's to try and reduce the volumes going into slurry stores. So by the end of your sort of preparation period, and by the 1st of August 24, you will have theoretically enough capacity to store all your winter's contaminated rainfall for that period. So additional storage capacity, as I said, can include your existing store, as long as it doesn't pose a pollution risk. So 5 or 6 months storage, as I said, once you get to that point, you will then comply. So each one of these will come in phases on those dates, and each one will become part of cross compliance as you go through the process. So these are the summary of the dates you need to consider. The silage clamps need to be compliant already. That is part of it. And to be honest, there's no change from SAFO. Anything you build now, NRW need to be informed 14 days before you start. The compliance for the storage for organic, when you include in temporary field heaps and FYM, that comes in from the 1st of Jan 23. And then the slurry storage comes in from the 1st of August 24, along with the closed period for spreading of slurry. So that's where you are with the structures at the moment. I'm sorry it sort of whizzed through, but I'm sure Lee will look at ways that we can go into more detail for the different types of things and how you can reduce the volumes later on other webinars. But I'll pass over to Chris now, and I think he can look at his side of it, and we can then move on to questions after Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Yeah, that was a good overview. Yeah, I forgot to say earlier, if anybody has any questions, please pop them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. In the middle of your screen is a Q&A button. Please put any questions you have for Keith or Chris or myself in Welsh or English, in the language of your choice, and we'll take them then at the end, and we'll answer as many questions as we can. Like Keith said, Chris Chris Guller's up next. Most of you probably will know and have come across Chris at some point. He's a soil and grassland consultant with Farming Connect, and he'll be covering the other side of the regulations, the nitrate management planning, the risk mapping, and the record keeping. So, Chris, over to you.
Good, thanks. Evening, everybody. Yeah, whistle stop tour of the new regs and what it means in terms of what we can spread and what we can't spread and when we can spread it. I'm going to follow the similar pattern to Keith, and we'll whiz through basically on the dates in terms of what's coming in and when it's coming in. Okay, so the impacts it's going to have on you guys, as from April, the regulations have started to kick in. To be honest, for a lot of people, the biggest impact is going to be the paperwork. So going forward, it's going to be the planning and recording of everything we do with fertilizer activities and manure. And at the minute, to be honest, a lot of people, it's already in the diary, but it's going to have to be in a form that is presentable. We're waiting on a whole pile of farmer-friendly spreadsheets to be published by Welsh Government. And I might be a little bit naive, but I would hope that an awful lot of people will be able to do this paperwork without getting a consultant involved. It's something that shouldn't actually be that onerous, but we need to get it right. But it's something, and again, to be honest, for a lot of people, the paperwork, once it's in place, it will be small tweaks every year to bring it up to speed. It won't be a massive redo. But certainly the paperwork issues, if you look at the guys in MVZs in England, that's probably where they fall down most, is on the paperwork side. The next impact, yeah, there will be changes to how we spread nitrogen fertilizers and how we spread our manures in terms of the timings and the rates, how we do it and when we do it. And I say a lot of that is about reducing risks of runoff and leaching, but there's also acknowledgement of the fact that we've got increasing ammonia loss and nitrogen going upwards into the atmosphere, so how we deal with that as well. The other big nasty elephant in the room is the 170 nitrogen loading limit. So there's still the whole flurry about whether this should be 170 or a derogation to 250. Basically, as it stands, and as I think it's likely to stand, your farm will not allow to produce more than 170 kilos of nitrogen per hectare from its stocking regime. And I'll go through how that's calculated, but I think that's probably here to stay. Certainly in England, derogations are not encouraged. The few guys that are at 250 have a regular appointment with friends from the Environment Agency, and they are totally, inspected on a regular basis. Okay, the immediate requirements that came in 2 months ago, some controls on the spreading of nitrogen fertilizer, both manufactured, confusingly in the paperwork they term nitrogen fertilizer. It's not just bag, it includes all the stuff that's in manure. So there's some measures about that, there's some measures about incorporating manures into bare stubbles, and there are some new dates for closed periods for spreading fertilizers. So as it stands, the rules that say we need to, before we spread fertilizer, we should be doing a field inspection. And I say that's fertilizer includes bag as well as manure. And it's basically about looking at the ground and saying, is it suitable to spread today? And that's looking at slopes, ground cover, how close you are to the brook and the ditch, the weather conditions, the soil type, and whether or not we've got land drains. And in many situations, it won't be about, all right, we're not going to spread anything today. It'll be about certain areas, certain fields that maybe we need to just be a little bit careful about and put them down as a high risk area and avoid them. And this risk assessment needs to be done before we spread. And I know it sounds obvious, but basically, yeah, we need to make that decision before the contractor arrives, because once he's there, it's hard to stop him spreading. All these old rules sit in place. You all know the deal about not spreading on waterlogged, flooded, snow covered, not within 2 meters of the brook with a spinner, and 10 meters with surface water with slurry and manures. We can get a little bit closer with the injectors to 6 meters. And on small fields, that can make a big difference in terms of your spreading area. I say these are nothing new. They already existed under cross compliance in the Code of Good Agricultural Practice. Okay, so the risk assessments. It literally is walking in, are the ground conditions good enough? You know, the picture on the left, this guy spread slurry on a field like that. So yeah, listen to Derek, do the obvious. And it's not just about, is it going to rain today? It's, is it going to rain tomorrow? And it's not just about how much rain, it's, are we forecast thunderstorms? So it's about the intensity as well. So yeah, that's my tick list. It doesn't need, there's no paperwork. There's no, they don't want you to record it as such. But if you haven't done that basic risk assessment, they're going to ping you for it. If you turn up and all your slurry is washed away because you've had a thunderstorm, the excuse that, oh, I hadn't seen the weather forecast isn't going to add up. I would question, well, how many people have a contract with a contractor? I know the answer, none of you. We did a meeting with contractors a couple of years ago, and the idea of having a contract in place that stipulated, I want you to go and spread 3,500 gallons on this, and this area. Don't go close to the brook and don't upset Mr. Jones next door with his borehole, give him a wide berth. And a statement in there to say, okay, if we do have an incident, here's my mobile, this is the NRW number, you sign it, I'll sign it, off we go. And I would encourage you all to think about contracts with contractors, because in general, if an incident happens on your land, you have the liability way above the contractor. If I have a contract in place, I'm not saying you'll get away with it, but the judge is going to certainly look a hell of a lot more favourable if we've got a contract in place that says, actually, I followed the rules and it's the contractor that's spread in the wrong place or too much and everything else. So it's something we want to look at going forward is the idea of actually having a contract with your contractor ahead of spreading, basically just to cover your back. Okay, so the next rule beyond that risk assessment, which will affect some people, is the incorporation of manure into bare soil or stubble. And this is again about the high nitrogen content materials, poultry manure, slurry, digestate. If it's going on a bare stubble, it needs to be incorporated within 24 hours, unless we've got dribble bars and the precision kit. It will also apply for farmyard manure if we're spreading it on a high-risk area. So if you're spreading solid muck, low nitrogen content, but it's still on a slope or on a floodplain, we want that incorporated within 24 hours. It's a combination of reducing that ammonia loss, but also reducing the risk of that direct runoff of the actual physical material into the watercourse. And it's nothing new. This used to be part of the whole advisory package, but it is now a requirement, and it came in 1st of April. And I've already seen plenty of people falling foul of that. And that'll be the maize guys. That will also be some of the guys coming out of stubble turnips and Swedes and the like, where ground is often dry enough to get onto spread, but not really dry enough to work. And I say that's the danger, is that in that interim period, all the stuff we apply can move. There's some rules coming about the spreading dates for manufactured nitrogen fertilizer. In terms of grassland, there is now a date that says you can't spread from the 15th of September to the 15th of January. But we've got an exemption for grass because we know, we're still on a productive ryegrass sward. We're still doing growth rates of 20, 30 kilos of dry matter a day. There is a response, so we have an exemption. So in reality, you can carry on spreading up until 30th of October. So I don't think this is going to impact on anybody, but it's a rule that's in place. As from 2023, the things that come in then are we need to have a risk map. We need to reduce wastage in basically how we spread our slurry. And we need to follow the regulations, as Keith alluded to, about temporary field heaps. And then we've got the 170 limit comes in in 2023, along with the individual field limits and a nitrogen management plan. So I'm just going to run through that lot. A risk map, an awful lot of people already have one of these in relation with their farm assurance. And the risk map identifies areas where we can't spread, the yards and the tracks, everything else. The high risk, the red areas that we don't spread. And again, that's Mr. Jones's borehole next door or your own borehole. And also those buffer zones within 6 meters or 10 meters of your water courses, depending on how you're spreading. Then I've got orange areas, which could be high slopes, steep slopes, which are high risk areas. Or very high risk areas. And I've got high risk areas that might be under drained, and then I've got my low risk, which tend to be your level fields that are under drained, that are a good distance from your water course. to be anonymous. This is my place. Okay, and these risk maps are literally, this is it, highlighted pen. So I've gone through, red pen, 10-meter buffer down the brooks and the drains. The yellow fields are the ones that I know I've got land drains in. They were wet in the past, they've been drained. The drains run, I know where the ends are. I don't know where the drains themselves are, but they are my high risk. My orange, my very high risk, because they're the slopey bits, and the green bits are the ones that I can spread on with a lower risk. And the premise is that we go through a risk map, and I've got a field there that was, according to my IAC map, 2.2 hectares. If I take out the red bit, because that's my no spread zone, I've now got a spreadable area of 1.9 hectares. And that's the process I'm going to need to do for each field, is what's my risk category and how much spreading area do I lose with all my buffers and everything else. So that's going to have to be recorded on your mapping exercise. Any of you with a Jetta gun, sell it quick, but they will no longer be allowed, nor will splash plate spreaders above a 4-meter trajectory. And that's about reducing ammonia loss, but also about accuracy of application. We're still able to put that lightly fouled water through an irrigator system, but the high Jettas are going to be a no-no. As Keith says, the temporary field heaps, we need to mark these on a map, and they can only go on the green bits of your farm. So we've got no problem with you taking muck out of a shed, as long as it's stackable. So in terms of things like, you know, the sloppy stuff that's half and half, no, it needs to be stackable and not start creeping across the field. And I need to put it 10 meters from walk course. If we start getting into slopes, then I extend that from 10 meters to 30 meters. And I need to change the place they go every year and not go back to that site for another 2 years. If you're taking poultry manure or other high nitrogen content, such as digestates and some of the biosolids, then it needs to be covered. So again, we need to think about either sticking it in the shed, or we can put a sheet over the top. But yeah, we need to be very careful where we put those high-end materials. Okay, this is where we get into trouble. The 170 limit. So the 170 figure that we're all going to have to adhere to by January 2023 is based on the amount of nitrogen that your animals produce. So it's got nothing to do with how much fertilizer you buy, what spreading rates we've got on your fertilizer. It's all about what animals are on your farm and how much nitrogen they actually physically produce. Because the rumen's a pretty inefficient beast, and 80% of the protein we feed in the front end falls out the back end. So we've got a whole load of tables that we can look at and assess what each individual animal on your farm produces in a calendar year. In addition to that, we add in any imports, or we can take off any exports of manure that's leaving the farm. And this figure doesn't include things like your biosolids and the digestate, which are an addition, but they're not included in the 170s. It will be retrospective. So basically it's based, even though it doesn't come until January 2023, it's going to be based on your stocking regime of 2022. In England, most people will do their 170 calculation sometime around July. So it gives them 6 months to make any adjustments if they need to get under the limit. So it's one that you don't want to be doing on Boxing Day in a panic. It's one thing that we need to sort of update halfway through the year just to see where we are. And again, for most people, we'll do it once and there'll be minor adjustments to make. It's only when we start changing your stocking regime or take on more land that we're going to have to, you know, seriously look at changing that big time. Again, as Keith showed, we've got all these lovely tables full of numbers, and we go through and we just say, how many stock have I got in this category? And if I've got a dairy cow that does less than 6,000 litres every year, she produces 77 kilos of nitrogen. So we can multiply that by the number of cows you've got and you come up with a figure. I can take off, as I said, any exports, and all I need to record is what manure I'm sending away. So Beef and Sheep Farmer down the road has 50,000 gallons of slurry off me. As long as it's in his paperwork as well, that's all we need to record. So I don't need weighbridge tickets, I don't need contracts, but we just need to have this paper trail that somehow tallies up that he's putting it down as an import and you're putting it down as an export. So if I've got my livestock nitrogen from the nice spreadsheet, and then I've got plus or minus any nitrogen going out the system, and I just divide it by my farm forage area. And that's the area that I can effectively graze or spread manure on. So it doesn't include things like ungrazed woodland, but it will include things like common land, and I can put an allocation in there, pro rata for any rented grazing and that sort of thing. But I say, we've got to take off just the non-grazed areas. Okay, and if your figure is over 170, don't panic. There are lots of ways that we can deal with it. Okay, the extreme ones, the expensive ones are we need to rent more land to spread, to lower my figure. I can reduce the amount of nitrogen that my stock produce. All right, I can keep less stock. I might be able to produce slightly lower yield. I might be in the position to sell my stock earlier. So the shorter the period the stock are on the farm, obviously the less nitrogen they produce. So if I move from a system that sells forward stores 18 months, I might look to sell some of them as weanlings just to maybe get under that. I might run a flying herd. I might end up with a heifer rearing arrangement to take some of my stock off farm for 8 months a year, something like that. Or I could look to export nitrogen away from the farm to other places. There are issues with this idea of exporting nitrogen in slurry. I don't want your dock seeds, let alone your TB. So it won't suit everybody, but for some it might well be an option. Okay, in addition to the 170 limit, there's also a field limit, and this has already been in place anyway, the 250 kilograms of nitrogen that comes out from manures. So this is nothing to do with fertilizer. This is about the total nitrogen that we get from manure. And if we look at things like the average slurry, that would be 96 cube. So close to 9,000 gallons an acre is my limit of what I can spread on the field before I exceed that 250 kilo N per hectare. It's not going to impact on many. Some of the large housed herds, some of the guys with poultry units, and maybe some of the guys on multi-cut that may be doing 3 or 4 slurry applications, they might pinch on it. But for most people, it probably won't be too much of an issue. Okay, so that's the limits in terms of the 170 limit and the 250 kilos of N limit. The 170 is all about your stock. The 250 is all about what you've actually physically spread. Okay, the next deal will be the nitrogen management plan. So this is paperwork. My worry about nitrogen management plans is they just sit in a filing cabinet waiting for an inspection. But if they're done properly, we can really hopefully reduce your fertilizer bill, we can improve your forage quality, and it will also add on, all the nutrient management plans can add on benefits to soil health and animal health. So yeah, hopefully it's going to work for more than just waiting for an inspection. Bizarrely, there is no requirement for an actual nutrient management plan. So the whole soil sampling and P&K and everything else sits outside all this regulation. But I would still encourage you all to keep sampling your soils and keep testing your pHs and Ps and Ks. For those of you with existing nutrient management plans, you'll probably find it's not detailed enough to pass a future nitrogen management plan inspection. Okay, so what do I need to stick in it? Oh yeah, by the way, if you don't chuck around a lot of fertilizer and you don't keep many stock, you can get a derogation from all this paperwork. My argument is there's an awful lot of work in working out that you can have a derogation. By the time you've done all that work, you might as well do the damn nitrogen figures anyway. So, but it's there for those of you with small areas and small holdings and not a lot of animals. Okay, so this is how I work my nitrogen management plans. I've got a nice spreadsheet and I've got a field here. I've soil tested my Ps and Ks. I've got a nitrogen supply, and I'll come on to how we work that out as moderate. And I've got a crop recommendation of 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, has 200 units an acre. And basically it's a 3-cut system. And I've planned that I'm going to put some slurry out in March, followed by a little bit of fertilizer. Again, a bit for the second cut, we might get a nice light dressing with a dribble bar of slurry, repeat again, and then I'm grazing through August, and yeah, I've got slurry going on back end. And I add up all the figures and it works out that I've given it 268 kilos, slightly above what I should have done, but well below any NMAX limits. And say every crop has a maximum threshold as to what I can and can't exceed. So for grassland, we're at 300. For other crops, this is slightly different. I don't think many people are going to butt up against the NMAX figure. But in this spreadsheet, it also works out how much slurry nitrogen I've applied, and it comes out 195 kilos. And if you remember, 250 is my limit. So these are the sort of tables that we do for every field. And I say, for an awful lot of your silage fields, they'll be the same. And we'll just be duplicating for grazing fields. There'll be some that'll be different on the nitrogen regimes, but for a lot of it, it will be, this is my grazing block, this is my silage block. It doesn't need to be too onerous. There are various software packages out there, and I'm hopeful that the spreadsheets that Welsh Government release will be similar to this and fairly easy to follow. Unfortunately for all of you, and I kind of sit in this box, the days of units per acre are disappearing rapidly. Everything's going to be in kilos per hectare. It's not a difficult calculation. You know, everything we got in units, we times it by 1.25 to get kilos per hectare. So 40 units an acre is 50 kilos per hectare. But yeah, we are going to have to move into the realms of kilos per hectare. All right, if you struggle sleeping, go and read RB209, fertilizer recommendations. And this is where all the data comes from. So for every crop, these are the grass figures for silage and grazing, and it's all based around how much grass you grow and how much fertilizer you can put on. And this is what we're working towards with everything we do with the nitrogen management plans, not exceeding what the book says. I say, in reality, an awful lot of people don't get anywhere close to applying these sort of nitrogen rates. Now, the plan that we produce needs to be a working document. I say, I don't want it to sit in a filing cabinet. So it's the sort of thing you should be sharing with your slurry contractor, so that he can see what the plan is, so he knows that in actual fact, you know, I need to keep to 4,000 gallons on this field because it's in the plan. And if I go over the top, I'm going to oversupply nitrogen. I'm going to fall foul of all the rules. So basically, everybody needs to be on board. As Keith said, the last nasty thing to come in August is my slurry storage periods. And it's all about, yeah, that period from 1st of September to 31st December on the lighter soils. And for most people, 15th of October to 15th of January, no spread. And then we can creep out with some in February. Now, in terms of issues for most people, yeah, it is going to create some grass quality issues. So if you're not able to get slurry out, we might have a wet February. So you might not get any slurry out until the end of February. It's going to butt up right against silage and early season grazing. So it is going to create problems. So we can try and mitigate as much as we can with the use of dribble bars and trailing chews. There will be pressure on contractors. And I do think there's probably time to think about maybe some of you might want to go and buy your own kit, as in not the whole umbilical and everything, but if you've got a tanker and you can creep out and do some of the grazing platform, maybe the first fields to get grazed in that early release period after the 15th of January, it might be, you know, a wise investment, but it is one of those things you need to think about early doors. Certainly we need to start planning. Don't panic for most people, but we need to start planning for the incoming regs now. Some of them are here. So the 2021 regs is all about doing those field assessments and about incorporating the manures into bare stubbles. Do your sums on that 170 limit. The spreadsheets will be available soon. And I'd say do them now, see how close you are. And if you come out at 185, there's probably scope within tinkering with the spreadsheet to get you under 170. If you come out on your first sums at 220, then there's probably thoughts to be had about buying in new land or changing stocking regimes. We need to identify all those risk areas, do your risk maps, and we need to create these spreading plans by January 2023 and think about how we're going to manage to avoid, manage those closed periods. I would say all of you, if you're using contractors, let's start these conversations now about what we're going to do going forward. And I say those sort of contractor relationships are going to be crucial if we're going to make all this work. Okay, that was your whistle stop tour. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you, Chris. That was great. Whistle stop tour from both speakers, but still a lot of content and a lot of information to take in. I think there was some really good hints and tips. Obviously, Chris's sort of ending remarks is start now, get the data, get the information, so you've got time to plan for those phase dates. Before we take some questions, again, there have some questions have come in, but if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat bar, in the Q&A bar, sorry, and we will ask them and answer them now after. Just quickly, and some of the questions are related to the Farming Connect services available and the other advice and that available. So, you know, you will be pleased to know that Farming Connect are working with the Welsh Government policy team to develop a range of advice and resources and services in relation to the regulations, and this webinar being one of them. There will be further webinars and workshops on topics as part of the regulations, and when you get the evaluation form at the end of this webinar, if you have any topics such as risk map or the 170 limit calculations that you really feel you would like to have advice and support on, put that in the evaluation and we'll make sure that we plan for those topics going forward. There's also been a fact sheet developed, and the fact sheet on the regulations will be sent to all farm businesses with the summer updates from Welsh Government in the coming weeks. That for farms that have the basic payments and receive the summer update. So again, that will be available digitally as well. We have developed on our Farming Connect website a designated agri-pollution web page where everything around agri-pollution and the regulations is there. All the support services, advice, case studies, grants, etc. Everything is there on the agri-pollution. So take a look. There is a link from our homepage on the website. So please take a look at that when you have some time. We'll also be sending out information in our sort of written as well as digitally in our technical publication that we send out in the post to all registered Farming Connect businesses. So you will be getting alerts and information around the topics discussed tonight through the written format as well as online as well. The services then that we have on offer, obviously mentioned future workshops and webinars. We also have advice and support through our one-to-one surgeries. So these are free one-to-one, 1 hour sessions with a consultant, and linked to the regulations. We've obviously got people like Keith and people like Chris who can discuss the slurry calculations or the 170 kilogram limit or risk mapping. They can discuss whatever subject you would like to discuss and start you, like I said, on the journey to identifying where you currently are with your business at the moment, so you can make decisions going forward. And also there's other advice and support available from other organisations. Chris has mentioned that Welsh Government will be issuing some electronic workbooks based on some of the forms that has been shown to you tonight. There's also grants like the FBG yard covering grant and the SBG grant that's recently closed. So keep an eye out for any future windows on the grant support. And also there's the agri-pollution helpline, which is facilitated by ADAS and is available to answer any questions on or around the regulations. Outside of advice and support for the regulation, we've also got the Agri Academy window open at the moment. The two categories this year are business and innovation and the junior program. So if anybody is interested in applying for that, the Agri Academy, the window is open until the end of the month, the 30th of June. It involves 3 residential weekends around the subjects. Very informative, very enjoyable, and every successful applicant gets a lot out of the Agri Academy and meets new people, learns new stuff, and really develops them as an individual within the agricultural industry. So anybody interested in anything I've said tonight, the best point of contact is the development officer team. Obviously, you should know your local development officer. Hopefully you do. If you don't, then please contact the service centre, or you can find a list of the development officers on our website. So that's enough from me. I can see we've got some questions, so we'll start from the top. So the first one, Keith, is for you. Can I store a stackable muck in a shed on an earth floor?
No, it needs to have an impermeable floor, really. So it needs to be concrete or tarmac, but it needs to be sealed to the wall floor joint as well, so there's no seepage out of the store. There's no requirement for a collection facility, but it needs to be impermeable, and the wall floor joint ideally needs to be sealed.
Thank you very much. Next question, what software is available to produce the completed documentation to demonstrate compliance? And then, has Welsh Government provided anything other than the non-interactive workbook? So we've obviously said the workbooks will be supplied electronically in time, but I suppose, Chris, for you, and Keith, what sort of software packages would you suggest are available to do some of these calculations?
Certainly Planet's the obvious one that people turn to, which is available. A lot of the commercial consultancy companies will have their own software packages. Yeah, I mean, hopeful that what comes out of Welsh Government will be nice and user-friendly and up to the job. You know, there's no other reason to produce anything that doesn't work, is it? So no, I'm hopeful they'll all work really well.
There's help, you know, with regards to the slurry storage side on the calculations of capacity with some things like Slurry Wizard and that sort of thing. But you just need to be careful. It's all about what information you put in. So you need to check that the rainfall figure is correct. You need to check that the amount of slurry produced by each particular type of stock is correct with the new regs, because on some of them it does differ, and it can make quite a big difference to the actual capacity you need. So you just need to be careful about what information you put in. And I know the temptation is to, you know, look at it with rose tinted glasses and try and make it look as best as you can, but it will come back to bite you. You know, if you get a cross-compliance inspection, or if you haven't got the storage capacity you need, then for the 5 months, obviously you're going to struggle when it gets to the end of that period. So it's not worth trying to sort of not fiddle it, but try and make it look as good as you possibly can. I would suggest you do it properly, find out where you are in the situation, then look at mitigation and how you can pull yourselves back to get to where you need to be, because there's always a way out of it, you know.
Yeah, thank you both. Do you envisage that the review of legislation will extend the lead-in period dates given recent circumstances? I'm not sure if either of you want to comment on that.
I'm not a politician, Lee, and I'm going to.
I didn't think so. And then the next phase of that question was around the grant rates. And again, I think that's a question for Welsh Government rather than myself or the speakers this evening. Next question, will there be Farming Connect consultant advice available and assistance to create risk maps? Like I said earlier on, we hope to provide advice and support through the various interventions that we have, workshops and webinars as well. And if the demand is there for support around risk maps, then the answer is yes, we will provide some advice and support on risk maps. Happy to do webinar or workshop as well on how to design it, how to put it together to make sure that everybody is compliant when it comes to an inspection. So the answer to that is yes, and you know, in time we'll come out with more information on that. Can you define sites for field heaps? Is there a minimum distance between two different heaps?
No, I don't think there's a minimum distance between two different heaps. The tricky bit will come is when you have to move the heap annually. So if you're right next door to each other, you obviously can't go onto the place where the other one's just left. So you just need to use a bit of sense in it, really, and just, you know, be practical. The site needs to be, as I said in the talk, you need to make sure there's no polluting risk from the site. So yes, you can recite them relatively close to each other, but you just need to use a bit of sense with it, really.
Yeah, I was with a guy a couple of days ago and we talked about building a track 100 yards long just to give him access to the top of the field, which was, you know, a nice level field, fairly dry, so that he had access to move his field heap further up the field every year so he could go a new site. And again, we were only moving the field heaps 50 yards along.
Yeah. But tracks tend to be a good conduit for runoff
Yeah.
as well. So you need to be careful where your track level is next to your field heap. So yeah, it makes sense, you know, if you've got a practical setup, as Chris said, if you can keep moving along the field and you're within the rules, and you know you're not causing any runoff on the track, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, and well, I think you've answered this question. How far apart do the annual sites need to be? Chris has mentioned 50 meters or 50 yards.
There's no
Is
figure,
that-
but yeah.
No. Brilliant, thank you. Would sheep tack contribute to the end loading of the sheep owner or the landowner? Chris?
They're on your land, they're eating your grass, which is full of protein, and it's producing available nitrogen out the back end. So they are part of your nitrogen loading for the time they're with you on your farm. Again, if I'm sending stuff away, like my heifers, going somewhere else, that goes on their loading, not mine. Yeah.
Okay. How do the regs view dew ponds? I don't know who wants to take that one.
They are a watercourse.
Yeah, they're a watercourse. Yeah, if they're clean, they're a watercourse. A ditch is a watercourse. A stream, dew pond, it'll be a watercourse. It'll be classed as clean water.
Thank you. Is the 170 limit? Is the 170 kilogram limited to under 9,000 litre per cow? And is this an average for the farm?
Okay. Yeah. I've been toying with this one and getting into trouble over this one, because an average is basically, if you're milk recording, you have a figure for every cow on your farm that you know how much milk she produces. If you're not milk recording and you have a daily milk ticket and you can work out your average, and you could argue that my average is 7,000 litres, but not all my cows are 7,000 litres. And the way averages work, probably half my cows are under 6,000 litres. So there is some wriggle room, should we say, in how we work out our milk yield in terms of per cow on an average basis. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. What is the time scale for the workbooks, etc., from Welsh Government, as this is what most people need to do the calculations and get prepared? I think that's yeah. We're unsure really of that. But if we, you know, as soon as Farming Connect get information with the workbooks, then obviously we can inform the industry of that. But at the moment, again, it's not in our gift to give that information, but I am aware that they're in development and that, you know, they will be available soon. So yeah, but understand that where that question's come from. And the final question then, who counts the loading limit for temporary CPHs, landowner or CPH owner?
I don't know off the top of my head, Keith.
No, I don't know, to be honest. I would have thought it's a CPH, to be honest.
The CPH owner. Yeah.
If you're the land manager, if you're in control of that land, it is nitrogen loading on you. Yeah.
On you. You're the responsible person. Okay. Yeah. If one late one, if farmyard manure is put straight from the shed into a trailer for field heaping, do I have to keep the trailer under cover?
If the trailer's not stored full, if the trailer's emptied, you can keep it outside. But if you're storing it, I know this has been pedantic, but if you're storing it and it's full and it's collecting rainwater, it's a collection facility. Ideally, you just want to take it out as soon as you put it in. As long as the land and weather conditions are suitable, you can get it out and spread it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or park it in a shed, I would suggest.
In a shed. Yeah, undercover. Good. Lovely. Well, that's the end of our questions. If there's no more questions, Anything finally from Keith, Chris, anything you want to say finally before we finish?
I would just say start to plan and don't be afraid to ask, really, however stupid you think the question is around the, you know, the stuff I do or whatever, or Chris does. The information you get when they come through you guys is totally confidential, so don't be afraid to ask. It'll just put your mind at rest. There's no point worrying about it. Let's come up with a plan now, and you've got the time to phase it in, you know. So I would say talk to somebody.
Yeah, there's probably more options than a lot of people think in terms of how we can accommodate these regs. And I say, you know, it's not something that we need to panic about in most situations. You know, there are lots of ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, thank you both. So yeah, just to reiterate then, when the evaluation comes through at the end of the webinar, if you have any elements that you've picked out of tonight's presentation you would like to have more support and advice on, please put those in the evaluation, and we'll make sure then that we provide that advice through workshops or one-to-ones. Like our speakers have said, access the services available to you as a Farming Connect registered business, either the resources on the website or the one-to-one advisory services, which are free. All it leaves me to do is to say thank you to Keith and Chris for their time this evening. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.